I want to talk about one of my favorite things, which are sneakers. When it comes to a shoe that I recommend to clients for doing change of direction work, there's a few things that I look for. And we're going to talk first about the anatomy of a shoe so we can understand why the certain components that I look for are really important. So we have the upper of the shoe, which is just kind of the outside of it. We have the lacing system, we have the insole, we have the lining, which is just the part that actually contacts the foot. And in some shoes, you'll see like that neoprene sleeve. That's pretty common in soccer cleats nowadays and in just cleats in general. Then we have the insole, which provides padding on the inside of the foot. Then we have the outsole, which is the rubber part on the bottom that provides traction. Between the insole and between the outsole, we have the shank, which we can see on these KD13s is a nice rigid piece of plastic, which is really important. And then from a front to back, we have the heel, and then we have the toe box. And there's, again, really specific things that kind of look for with each component of it. When it comes to the upper itself, I want an upper that's stiff and not overly flexible and doesn't have a lot of give to it, because when we change direction, especially the example that I'll kind of use throughout this video, it is a lateral cut. So if I'm going to my right and I have to cut back to my left, that inside edge of my shoe touches the ground first. I have a brief moment of supination that I have to resist, otherwise I'm going to go into the outside edge of my foot. So I hit with the inside edge of my shoe, kind of goes flat, and then we should see us kind of reverse that motion and pronate as we then push off and move in the new direction. If the upper is overly mobile, you'll see the foot actually slide within the shoe. So if the foot slides within the shoe, then we're going to be more likely to kind of get that lateral ankle sprain. So I want something that really locks down the forefoot and doesn't allow for any ab or adduction of the forefoot. When the lacing system, all shoes pretty much have laces, or at least shoes that you would be performing this stuff in. And the lacing system is important because that's what keeps the foot in place. You'll see kids, because it's comfortable, they don't lace their shoes tight when they're walking around, but then if they kind of take that idea into the gym or into training and they're trying to change direction in a shoe that their foot is essentially kind of floating around in, well, again, we're more likely to suffer some sort of like lateral ankle sprain or ankle sprain in general. But on a performance end of it, we're going to be losing a lot of force from the ground, because if the shoe hits the ground and it's almost unstable on the foot, then we have the foot or the shoe moving on the ground and the foot moving within the shoe. So we're losing force from the ground. We're losing that ground reaction force that the athlete needs to eventually actually change direction. So lacing your shoes snug, and I lace my shoes probably too tight because I like the way it feels, is really important. Just to have them snug and to make sure your foot actually feels secure within the shoe so we don't lose any force from the ground and we have good interaction with the shoe and the foot on the ground, not only just having interaction with the shoe on the ground and the foot within the shoe, if that kind of makes sense. So again, I want to make sure the foot and the shoe kind of act as one unit rather than two separate units. So if your foot isn't tied down tight within the shoe, we're going to be essentially having two units, the foot and the shoe, interacting with the ground rather than them being able to work together. For the heel, I want a heel that's relatively stiff like this. So if I push in on these KD13s, the heel doesn't buckle. At the top it does a little bit because that's just padding, but the part that actually cups the heel at the bottom is really stiff and rigid because we're going to control that frontal plane motion of the heel as, again, the heel hits the ground and rolls back and forth, because I want to allow for that frontal plane motion of the heel, that inversion and eversion, but I don't want it to be able to go too far and I don't want it to not be able to move at all. So that's why having some give I'm okay with, but I want it to be a relatively stiff shoe to, again, be able to control the motion of the foot. When it comes to the lining, honestly, I don't really have a preference for that. Some people like the insoles, like the lining that's more of like the sleeve or the sock on the inside. I like things like this where they're kind of separated. The insole, you just want to be comfortable. I like when shoes, you can feel your whole foot within the shoe. So if you're someone that has a little bit higher arch, I want you to be able to kind of feel the arch with arch support within the shoe. That's from a fit and a feel standpoint. That's one of the things I think is really important, is having you feeling like your whole foot is supported within the shoe. When we move to kind of the outside of the shoe, the outsole, the traction should be whatever kind of works with the surface that you're working on. So typically the three types of shoes that I recommend for clients are basketball shoes, tennis shoes, or volleyball shoes. And if we think about it, all of those sports involve a lot of really hard changes of directions and accelerations. So it makes sense that those shoes are really good for hard changes of directions and accelerations. So just depending on like whatever surface you're going to be working on, the outsole should kind of match that. I like the outsole on a shoe like this, that if you can kind of see on the edges of it, it's rounded just a little bit. It's not like completely, not like an actual circle or anything. It's not super rounded, but it has pretty soft edges. Because again, when that foot, especially on the inside here, has a little bit softer of an edge than it does on the lateral side. So on this medial inside, has a pretty soft edge, because again, when the foot touches the ground, I don't want like you're falling off of a cliff. I want that smooth transition across different planes in different motions as an athlete as their foot interacts with the ground. So if we have a shoe that has like a hard 90-degree cut here going from the kind of the lateral side to the bottom, as the foot touches the ground in hard changes of direction, it's almost like we're moving from one plane to the other, not having that kind of gradual transition between edges between planes. So having a shoe with a little bit of a rounded edge, I definitely think is a good thing for change of direction shoes. As we look and talk about the shank, again, with these shoes here, we have a really nice, stiff, rigid stiff, rigid shank. And this one is plastic. You can kind of hear that there. A lot of tennis shoes also, you'll actually see, just like these, you'll see that plastic shank, which again, I really like, because I want a shoe that bends at the toe box, but doesn't fold in the middle. So if I try to fold these in the middle, I'm trying to bend the shank, which it really isn't gonna happen. The shank provides rigidity and structure to the shoe, but also allows for some motion. So if we think about a lot of like running shoes or kind of just casual shoes that people wear, like Ultra Boosts and Nike Frees, or Adidas Ultra Boost and Nike Frees, they don't really have a stiff shank. They have a very soft the outsole and the shank are all very soft. So that shoe is like a sock where I could kind of like wring it out. With a shoe like this that has a good stiff rigid shank, I can twist the shoe, but I can't just completely fold it in half and kind of twist it out and wring it out. So I want a shoe that again allows for the different motion in the different planes of the foot, but also limits it. So I don't want it to be too stiff where it's like a boot where there's almost zero movement, but I also don't want something that provides no support and no structure to the foot. I also look for a pretty limited heel to toe drop. These almost look like they have a high heel to toe drop, but they really don't. That's just because the outsole is kind of built up onto the upper a little bit more. Because if I were to put my finger kind of down towards the bottom, the heel kind of sits almost where this little line is going across the bottom of the shoe. I don't want a huge heel to toe drop like a lot of running shoes have, because I don't want people feeling like they're falling forward the whole time. I want athletes to be able to feel balance in every single movement that we do, whether they're shuffling, lateral running, hip turning, jumping, it doesn't really matter what it is. I want them to feel like their foot is sitting in a good plane, because as we have that foot on the ground and their ankle is dorsiflexed, so their knees forward, I want them to be able to feel like they're supported the whole time. If their knees forward and they're dorsiflexed, that's almost, and we have a higher heel to toe, it's almost gonna be like they're falling forward the whole time. So I want athletes always to feel kind of pressure on the balls of the feet and that inside edge of the shoe when we're in a static position, but I don't want them to feel like they're falling forward. So I want a pretty limited heel to toe drop. And almost every shoe has some heel to toe drop. I just don't want one that's really excessive, where if you're standing in it, it actually feels like you're kind of falling on your tippy toes the whole time. So one of the things that I'll see athletes train in will be a shoe that is really soft. So running shoes are really comfortable, or casual shoes that are just kind of look good are really comfortable typically, but they're not always the best for change of direction work, because they don't have some of those things I'm looking for. They don't have a good rigid shank that doesn't allow the foot to bend in the middle of the shoe and doesn't prevent some of this kind of torsion of the foot that I need to be able to do when I'm interacting with the ground during a change of direction. And they often don't have that nice, rigid, stiff heel stiffener. So when it comes to the actual profile of the shoe, meaning low top, mid top, or 3/4 like these are, or high tops, I don't really think it matters. I think that's much more of like a personal preference thing. I'm a fan of kind of these mid top, 3/4. I just like the way it feels on my ankle because it makes my foot and my ankle feel really secure. I think, again, it's more of a personal preference. I don't think that the actual like lacing your ankle up that high or lacing your shoe up that high provides that much stability for your ankle. I think it's more of a sensation thing. And if your shoe is tight, your ankle feels a little bit more stable because joints like compression. So we're just kind of providing compression to the ankle when the shoe is a little bit higher with a 3/4 or a high top. And if you think about like the sports, most volleyball shoes are low top. Most tennis shoes, I would say, are lows or mids, and basketball shoes are pretty much all over the place. You see some low tops, you see some mid tops, you see some high tops, but again, that's just kind of a personal preference. And again, for myself, I like something that just feels comfortable, and to me, what feels most comfortable is some sort of mid top typically. Finally, what I typically recommend overall for athletes when they're looking for a good training shoe, especially for change of direction in agility work, and even for speed work, to be honest, is I look for a shoe with those kind of qualities that has a good stiff, rigid shank, where I can hopefully see the plastic. That's a good sign that tells me that there is a good shank. Bends at the toe, not at the midfoot, has that stiff heel, has that arch support on the inside that I'm looking for. So once your foot's in it, you should feel like your whole foot is kind of supported. And you can always get different insoles. We recommend Superfeet a lot. That's a huge one that we recommend for clients just because they're relatively cheap compared to like a custom orthotic, but they're just as good in my opinion. And I want a shoe that's just comfortable. Like the shoe should actually feel comfortable for you. So from a brand standpoint, I don't think it matters. That's kind of a personal preference, but the type of shoe I recommend: tennis shoes, volleyball shoes, and basketball shoes that meet these requirements.